Greetings, students. Welcome to Mr. Liddle's History Bites. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 16, Part 3, Society in Europe. By the end of this history bite, you should be able to answer these essential questions. How did economic change affect social structures in Europe during this time? And how did changes in political structures affect social structures during this time? So we'll start with the East this time. The majority of people in the Byzantine Empire were what we call free peasants. They were not subject to a lord. They were given their own land, and they could do with it what they will. For example, the theme system, which we've mentioned before, was sometimes made up of former soldiers who, after their term of service was up, were given a nice chunk of land to live on. And that's not to say that everybody was well off. For example, there was a famous revolt led by a person named Basil the Copperhand, so called because he had a copper hand. But the majority of farmers in the Byzantine Empire were independent. They owned their own land, and they were able to grow whatever they wanted to grow and sell it however much they wanted to sell it. Now, this produced a large surplus of food, and this allowed for the great cities of the empire, such as Constantinople or Athens or Adrianople, to support large numbers of artisans and craftspeople. And this contributed to Constantinople being a major trade hub because of all the food produced by the independent farmers. Now, it's also worth noting that the Byzantine Empire was a highly urbanized society. Constantinople, for a long time, was the largest city in all of Europe, right? And it rivaled even that of Baghdad and Chang'an and Kaifeng over in Asia. And it supported traders and artisans so much that it even developed its own local silk industry. For a long time, only China and some parts of India had been able to produce silk, but the Byzantines also eventually developed a local silk industry. According to legend, a monk named Porcius had traveled to China and had kept silkworm eggs in his monk staff, and then walked all the way back to Europe with these silkworm eggs, and then developed the silkworm industry in Constantinople. Probably not exactly how it happened, but nonetheless, they did develop their own industry that they then traded with both Western Europe as well as the Islamic world. And it's worth noting that Constantinople, being the largest city and being the center of the largest empire in Christendom, was essentially the heart of the Christian world. Even though Rome held a special place for the Catholics of the West, there's no denying that in sheer numbers, Constantinople as a city was the heart of the Christian world. In the West, by contrast, most peasants were agricultural serfs. As we have pointed out before, the decline in central authority led to local lords holding more authority over their peasants. And although there were a number of agricultural innovations during this time, such as the iron plow, which allows for deeper cuts into the soil of northern Europe, and the horse collar, which allows horses to work faster than oxen and doesn't kind of cut off their airway like the old oxen collar had, the population still grew very slowly. By the end of 1200, the population was still a lot lower than it had been during the Roman Empire. And remember that invasions by outside forces between 600 and 1000 had destroyed the trading network that had existed within Western Europe, right? Cities had been a major target, which meant the populations of cities had declined. The population of Rome at the height of the Roman Empire had been perhaps 1 million or more people, but it had declined to only about 10,000 people 200 years after the end of the empire. And so this is in part because of invasions from outside forces. Rome itself was raided several times. People seeking to escape all of this danger often joined monasteries instead of becoming craftspeople. And trade routes themselves were not safe because of these outside invasions. And this, of course, led to a decline in regional trade. Western Europe during the Roman times had produced a number of products, but these required talented craftspeople, things like glass, iron, woolen textiles. They mined gold and silver in the mountains just north of what is now Italy. But all of these required talented and skilled craftspeople, which were in shorter supply than they had been during the Roman times, in part because of violent raids, in part because of the population decline, and in part because of the destruction of cities, meant that people focused more on agriculture than they had on, say, producing nice products. It is worth noting that the Vikings, while they did do a lot of raiding and pillaging and violence, did do some organized trade. They moved some items from Northern Europe down, for example, to the Mediterranean region. But this was relatively small, and it was not really organized. It was just up to sort of the Norse individuals to try to trade whatever they could. We do know that they traded both in East and Western Europe. But again, compared to, say, trade on the scale of the Roman or the Byzantine empires, it was a very small amount of trade. So you should be able to answer those essential questions. Thank you so much for joining me for this History Bite, and I'll see you next time.